Hey everyone, welcome to Relax with Macro Stress Relief in Your Own Backyard. My name is Caroline. I am a Sony Artisan and photographic artist and instructor, and you can find me at these websites, carolinejensen.com, creativephotographynetwork.com, and at CarolineJ on IG. I want to just especially thank Kayla Lindquist with Sony and Sony in general for supporting me in this mission. This is something that I am so incredibly passionate about, and I'm very, very excited to bring this to you today. I absolutely love this topic. This is something that I want to spread far and wide and hopefully help as many people as I can. So thank you so much for being here. I am just really excited that you're here, and I just really feel very blessed that I get to hang out with you. And I want to just say that you being here is awesome. And I want to just also say that it's not just for you that I'm doing this. I would hope, and it's my genuine hope, that you would take what you learn here and pass it on to somebody else who may be feeling stressed or under a lot of trouble. I know there's a lot of professional photographers watching right now. And if you can take your knowledge and use some of the tips and tricks that I give here to simplify your knowledge down to help somebody who may not be a photographer already, that is a huge goal for me. So let's get started. I don't like to start on a sad note, but I think it's really necessary because in the end, this is kind of the point of how this all came to be. Life is really hard, and right now, it's harder than normal, I think. We've had this long stretch of low to high level stress impacting our lives every day. And with this whole COVID-19 thing, some people are working triple time and some people are completely out of work. Some people don't know where their next meal is coming from. Some people are struggling to get medical care. I mean, there's just a lot that's been going on, and it's been hard. But this whole idea of macrotherapy didn't start with COVID-19 for me. This wasn't a new concept. It goes back to a pretty dark time in my family's life. And it's been definitely a struggle. About 6 years ago, actually, when this photo was taken of my daughter, we went through a period of time where one of our children suffered from some pretty severe mental issues and ended up trying to kill himself 4 times over the course of a period of time. And it was really, really hard. It was a super hard time. And I was struggling to cope as a mother, and my husband was struggling to cope as a father. And I didn't really understand how hard it was on the other kids too. So one day I was just distracting myself by taking photos, and I turned around and my daughter was sitting around on the counter. And this is the look that she gave me, and I just shot the picture. It wasn't like a photo session. It wasn't on purpose. It was just kind of a spontaneous moment that said it all. We were really, really hurting, and we didn't know how to fix it. And there was a lot of periphery things going on around it that just made it extra hard. And it was at that time that my macro lens took on a new life. Before that, it had been something I used to take pictures of objects close up, like fabric or pills or things that were normal, water droplet photography. I didn't really use it except just for fun. And it was something that I loved, but I didn't really find my groove with it yet. But it was at this time that the beauty of nature and macro started to come together for me, because literally I would go outside in our yard, which is pretty sizable, and I would plunk myself down and I would just cry. And then I'd sit there with my macro lens and I'd photograph weeds and leaves and little flowers in the grass or whatever happened to be in the immediate area that I plunked myself down, and I would start photographing them. And it changed me. It elevated my mood. It made me feel like I could handle another day. So I want to just take you through the process of the things that I've learned and how they may be able to help you too. I want to be clear, this is for all ages. This isn't just for adults. And this is my little niece, Clara. I love her so much. She's like 9 going on 35. And she's a thinker like I am, meaning sometimes you have trouble turning off your mind. You have big questions that, most people don't have the answers to, and you want the answer right now. But she showed an interest in photographing flowers and getting in close and photographing flowers. And so I sent her a camera, and here she is, enjoying this. And, stress doesn't just happen to adults. It hits kids too. And even if it's a good stress, like her mother, my sister, had a double lung transplant last December. And it was hard. It's awesome that she got lungs, and it's really a blessing. Thank you to the donor family. If anybody's watching from that family, it's just like unbelievable gift, but it's heavy. The whole thing is just a heavy thing. And then she had to be separated from her children for several months while she recovered. And fortunately, with COVID, she's been able to be home with her kids, and her kids haven't been going to school. So they've been able to, stay out of germs and things, and they could control it better. So it has the silver lining for them. But the point is kids feel stressed too. And being able to put a camera in their hands and get their mind occupied and out of their current situation for just a few minutes is so valuable. So it's for all ages. And the reason it's valuable is that we're spending time looking at little miracles. We're spending time looking at things that we can't create with our own hands. We are spending time seeing things that we would miss. Everybody under the sound of my voice probably has seen a leaf in the last 24 hours, correct? Somewhere, dead or alive, you've probably seen a leaf. And I can probably say with certainty that nobody's looked this close at one. But when you do, it changes you. It fascinates you. It engages your brain, and it does so many wonderful things. So spending time with these little miracles is a huge, huge thing. So what is macrotherapy? Let me just define this for you, because we have macro on one side, which is the true art form of macro, where we are using a definite macro lens. You're using generally deep depth of field, lighting, artificial lighting, focus rails or focus stacking rails, stacking focus in your post-processing program. It can be very labor intensive, probably things to block the wind or hold the flowers, or it can be very intense. And it's a true art form with definite rules and regulations and things. Now, when it comes to macrotherapy, we kind of throw out a lot of it because the joy of it is in the journey. The joy of it is in the process of spending time in the presence of beauty, and it's not so outcome-based. We don't want to necessarily create the most perfect image ever. We want to just, as I said before, plunk yourself down and enjoy the moment. And so generally we're using one camera, one lens. Shallower depth of field is generally an easier thing to do because it's more accessible to people with natural light. And the general theme of it is to seek sanctuary from the chaos of life. All right, so here are some principles of macrotherapy. Number one, we're going to work with nature. So if it's windy, we're going to work with wind. If it's sunny, we're going to work with sun. If it's raining, if it's, whatever it is, if it's humid or whatever happens, whatever the weather, even if it's freezing cold in winter, we're going to be working with nature and saying, what can I do in this situation versus what can't I do? And it's often very normal things like window boxes, flower pots, the meridian in the middle of the road, landscaping, planters outside of businesses. And it's usually short, 5 to 20 minutes. The one thing that I like to say is to give yourself some grace. If there's something that it makes your life easy, for instance, if you're a brand new photographer and auto is working for you, go ahead. We don't want this to be about getting technical perfection, because it can take away the joy. There's time and a place for that. There's time for growth. There's time for learning. There's time for moving past that. But initially, just let yourself, you just start at whatever level you're at, but get going. And then this is a big one, and I have it bolded. When you use your phone, it can cause a problem. And there are some amazing phone lenses. There's the Moment lens, macro, which is awesome. But the thing is when you use your phone, you're tempted to get notifications. So If you can be trusted to turn off your notifications, then go ahead and use your phone. But if you feel like you're going to be sidelined and you have something coming up, I mean, anybody can put their phone in their purse in the car, or leave it on your desk, or leave it on your bed, or give it to your significant other or something, and then just go do this with a real camera, because it will be more beneficial for you. And it's all about seeking peace in accessible places. Okay, this isn't about seeking peace in, flying in a plane to some exotic botanical garden in South America. I mean, this is about seeking peace in a place that you can find today, wherever you are. If you're in New York City or LA, if you're in the Midwest, it's about seeking peace in accessible places. This spot of little Lily of the Valley was found by me in my town of 600 people. I live in a town of 600 people. There are blocks probably with more people on them in New York City than where I live. And this was a drain and not very exciting, of course. But we were driving somewhere else and I said, "Stop, I see the Lily of the Valley." And I got out and I sat down on the edge of that curb right there and I took a picture. Actually, I took several pictures. I have a YouTube video of the behind the scenes of it, but I want you to see that an accessible place like this can create beautiful images like this in no time. And I can teach you how to make images like this too. And if you're already a professional photographer and already know how to do this, I am calling on you to teach someone else how to do this. Isn't it pretty? My husband calls them bowler hat flowers because they look like little bowler hats. I think they look like little bells, but whatever it is, it's very accessible. You don't want to be seeking things outside of your reality. Whatever is available, weeds or dandelions or lily of the valley by a drain, whatever it is, seek that out. And make friends with your plant-loving neighbors. If you have a friend who has all kinds of houseplants, ask if you can photograph her houseplants. If you have neighbors, like this is a neighbor about a block and a half away, and she does all these beautiful flowers, and it's awesome, and I just say, "Can I photograph your irises?" And usually they're not upset with you or anything. They're excited and flattered that you are bothering to come hang out with them and that you appreciate their hard work. So provided you don't mess up their lawn, I mean, just pointing your camera at the things is actually quite enjoyable. So definitely keep that in mind. All right, so to sit on the shade on a fine day and look upon verdure is the most perfect refreshment. This is from Jane Austen. And I love this quote so very much, because verdure and refreshment are two words that just jump out at me. Okay, so even back in Jane Austen's day, who I love her movies, I read all her books. I mean, not that she knows about the movies, but I mean, I like the well-done movies about her books. And I also love to read her books. But the word verdure comes from the word verdant, which means green. And so to sit in greenery, leaves, trees, flowers, it's refreshing. It's refreshing. And to me, it's like greenery is like a tall glass of water on a really hot day. You get that tall glass of water that's cold when you are super hot and sweaty. It is refreshing. And the greenery is refreshing to your mind. It's refreshing to your mind. It gives you so much back. And I want to just go in a little bit about that. So gardening can offer relief from anxiety symptoms. That's what anxiety.org says. So if you like to garden, take it one step further, do all the work, but then photograph your work. Because there's nothing worse to me than when somebody who spent a season working on growing the most beautiful dahlias points their phone in your face and says, "Here, look at my beautiful dahlias," and they're just blurry blobs of color. I want to help them because they put so much work in that. I want them to be able to put those dahlias up on their wall and be super proud of what they've done and the work that they've put into that. I want them to be able to sit and appreciate the little fine details of what they've put their heart and soul into. And if you don't garden, find somebody else who's super passionate about gardening and photograph their stuff. I think that the act of appreciating and sitting down and enjoying the details is absolutely stress reducing. Now this kind of summarizes the whole thing. I know it's kind of a boring screen with lots of words, but I have to put it in here because I think it really helps to bring it all together and makes it all make sense. So Louis Schwartzberg has a glorious TED Talk that's just beautiful from 2011 called Nature, Beauty, Gratitude. Nature, Beauty, Gratitude. And he photographs flowers time lapse as they open. It's just stunning. It's so beautiful. And he says that nature's gift, beauty, is a gift that cultivates appreciation and gratitude. All right, so nature's beauty cultivates appreciation, which cultivates gratitude. Now, Robert Emmons, a professor at UC Davis, says gratitude blocks toxic emotions such as envy, resentment, regret, depression, which can destroy our happiness. So nature, sitting in the beauty of nature, cultivates and wells up in us gratitude and appreciation. And that feeling of gratitude and appreciation blocks out the negative. Do you see where I'm going with this? So spending time in nature, not just sitting there stagnant, but being active with it. And that's why it's important to kind of take what the camera has and gives you that makes your life easier and take advantage of that. Because by taking advantage of some of the internal things in a camera that can make it easier, lets you focus more on what you're actually doing. I don't want you to be thinking like a photographer as you're making these images. I want you to be thinking about somebody who's appreciating what they're getting to see that they wouldn't normally get to see. Okay, let that sink in for a little bit. All right, so 120 minutes a week of nature pills. Okay, this is a study. You can look it up. I encourage you to go Google 120 minutes a week of nature pills, and you'll find numerous articles about where that originated, but it reduces your stress, lowers your cortisol, lowers your blood pressure, and your heart rate. You need to lower cortisol and lower your blood pressure, lower your heart rate, reduce your stress, 120 minutes a week. So about 20 minutes a day. Okay, that's what I'm for people who don't get outside or maybe just have houseplants or something like that. This appreciation exercise is so valuable. Put those plants out on your patio or your front step and you're doing even better. All right, so let's talk about ways to make this easier, because I want this to be accessible to as many people as possible. So I say filling the frame is good enough. You don't have to necessarily have a macro specific lens, although that's really helpful, but you can accomplish this with other lenses. My favorite, of course, is the 90 millimeter macro from Sony. I have used this one to death. It is covered in scratches and dings, and it's got dirt in every crevice, I think, because I crawl on the ground with it. It needs to be serviced, but it still works like a charm. And as long as I blow out the dust, I'm good. But anyway, it's awesome and I highly recommend it. But if you're a portrait photographer and you photograph people normally, you might have a beautiful 135 millimeter like this 135 G Master, which is also my baby. I love that one. And I bought it for portraits, but I use it for flower portraits more often now. So that's a great option. If you have a kit of portrait lenses, use those. And then if you have a point and shoot, go ahead and use that too. There's no limitation here. If you can fill the frame with your subject, you can go ahead and use it. All right, and then here are a few rules that I feel necessary to touch on because I get questions a lot. And like I'll take a picture or show behind the scenes and they'll say, you really should have stopped that down. Why were you shooting at f2.8? You should have shot at f11. And that's the first rule to break is the shallow depth of field rule. And the reason that I do this is because it's accessible to people. And I also think it's beautiful. But sometimes people only have a nifty 50, and at 1.8, the light may not be the best and shooting wide open is what is available to them. And so I say, take in a part of the whole. Sorry, my hair is tickling me. So you want to take in the part of the whole. And a peony like this can be huge. And so you can't take in the entirety of it in one frame necessarily and have it look really good. It might just look like this blob in the middle of the frame. So if you can get just a portion of it with your camera, or maybe you have enough pixels that you're able, the megapixels that you're able to crop in a little bit, whatever works for you, and sometimes shallow depth of field is best. The other one is cranking up your ISO. This image, these are so funny. These are called bee balm or monarda, and I have them all over my property. And we were out taking a walk one night and I saw this one and I wanted to photograph it after the sun had set. It had gone behind the horizon and the soft glow you see in the background is actually the afterglow of the sun going down. I had to crank my ISO up really high in order to make this image. But cameras these days, they can handle it. Noise reduction these days can make it better. And these little plants are so funny. They look like alien spaceships to me. Each one of those odd looking petals is a little conical extrusion thing. It's funny. And it's sought after like gold from things like butterflies and bumblebees, anything with a proboscis that can go in to these little petals that are cylindrical, but they just look funny. They look like little alien spaceships all flying on my, on the prairie. But they're funny. And I love to photograph them because of that. So crank up your ISO, let the camera just deal with the noise, and you can take care of it later in post if it bothers you. The other thing is sometimes it's windy. And one of the things that drives me crazy with macro photography, when you're really trying to do it well in the normal sense of the word, is that you have to figure out how to block the wind, wait for the wind, or do something about the wind. And I live in a really windy area, so it's a struggle. And I realized one day that I have to let this go. I have to work with the wind. So if I can crank up my shutter speed to 1/8,000th of a second and lock it down, awesome. If I can't, I work with abstract imagery. I might try slowing down my shutter and just letting the wind blow and see if I can paint something on the sensor, or use intentional camera movement along with the wind. This was taken in a really windy condition in the middle of the woods, and I believe I just sort of held it steady and let things blow, and it created this out of focus look, and I think it's really pretty, So it's really augmenting and approaching your image making in a way that embraces what you're given in front of you. And then I've mentioned this before, but letting your camera do some of the work is imperative. You've got to let your camera take over where you're struggling. Now, if you're a pro and you know everything and you do everything right, then this section may not be helpful for you, but it will be helpful if you're helping somebody else. If you're trying to help your daughter or your niece or your cousin or your uncle who's under a lot of stress, and they need to de-stress. Maybe they're a doctor during COVID and they come home and they're stressed and they need to just unwind and they don't have time to go do something else, because they're working 20-hour shifts or whatever. This is something that you can get somebody up and running quickly. Okay, so these are some of the tips that I teach people right away that help them like their camera better. Number one, I use wide focus, and this is a screen grab from a video of these cherry blossoms kind of going like this and moving a lot. And the little green dots on the wide focus just chase it. They just chase it all. And it lets me focus on the composition and what I'm seeing, and I don't worry so much about focus. Now, someone who is trying to manually focus in a situation like this would get super frustrated because everything is moving. So wide focus is the best option for something like this because, maybe I'll shoot 20 or 30 extra frames to get the one that I like, but I get to be in the moment, noticing the beauty of these cherry blossoms and not just screaming at myself about how frustrating it is to get a single spot to stick on one of these things before it moves. I mean, it was really moving a lot. And this whole situation here, ISO 640 and 1000th shutter speed, chasing it a little bit, I was able to get this pretty image here. And that's very calming and peaceful. And that's what I was envisioning as I was taking the picture. I wasn't thinking about the fact that, why is everything moving so much? I was able to just enjoy. And that's the point. The other thing that I love to throw in here is focus peaking. This was a lifesaver for me as somebody who loves vintage lenses and lenses that, require manual focus. Reducing the struggle with focus peaking was huge for me. And you can go into the settings of your camera to dial in have it be more sensitive or not. Sony cameras for sure, and I think most other cameras probably do as well. And this just gives you some very valuable visual feedback if you end up manually focusing or using a lens that doesn't have autofocus. It just is so helpful. And sometimes even with an autofocus lens, sometimes it is better just to switch to manual focus, especially if it's a stagnant, that's not the best word, static. There we go. A static subject that's not moving. Like more of a stationary flower or whatever, it's easier to do manual this way. And now, if I want to get somebody up and running with metering, now all of you old school people out there who are like me and you learned with the zone system, all the more power to you. I'm not knocking the zone system. It works. And that's where you'd say, for those who don't know, it's something like metering a grass to 0, or metering a blue sky to 0, or, metering somebody with light Caucasian skin to +1 or something like that. That's how you meter normally. Well, I teach metering with zebra stripes because it's infinitely easier for people to visually see what's happening. And it also keeps them continually engaged with their subject. So for instance, if you are photographing a flower, what I tell them to do is I suggest a shutter speed and an aperture that I think will work for the situation. And then I say, here's the ISO wheel. Just crank it up until you see the zebra stripes, and then tick it back until they go away on your subject, and then take your picture. And what this does is it creates an exposing to the right scenario with the histogram, and it gives them the most data possible without blowing anything important out. Now, there might be some blowing in the background, but we get the main subject in focus and properly exposed. And it's a very quick way for people to learn to meter without having to think so hard. And it's very quick now. So if your muscle memory and your mind is all in tune to regular metering, great. But if you're trying to get like a child or somebody who is new to photography or cameras or shooting anything in manual, having them do it this way gives them that automatic gratification of taking a good picture right away. So it's really helpful. Also, I go into the camera menu and I set it to neutral color, because when you're looking at a picture that's been taken, reviewing a picture or as you shoot, what you're seeing is a JPEG preview of the image and not the raw. So because of that, if you have, say, vivid picture style or creative style there, it's going to show this really bright and vibrant and possibly brighter, more, the histogram move more to the right than maybe it will be with the raw. And so I'm trying to bring the raw file and the JPEG closer together so that what you're seeing is more what you're going to get. Now, if you're shooting JPEG, don't worry about any of this, just shoot what you like. But if you're shooting raw, it's very helpful to shoot with neutral color settings to bring everything closer together. All right. And then I don't like to just shoot the same, sometimes you're shooting the same thing over and over again. Maybe you have a window box that's outside where you work or outside your house. And so it's the same flowers over and over again, and it can get boring really fast. So one of the ways to inject more interest in things that you shoot over and over again is to have a few little portable tools that make your life more fun. So let me walk you through those. Sparkle spray. So I love sparkle spray. This is my sparkle spray that I have at home. It's like a 6-ounce bottle or so that I keep at home. And I also have a 1-ounce bottle that I have in my purse. Bonus, it's great for curly hair. If you have curly wild hair, it actually helps with frizzies and flyaways. So it serves dual purpose if you're interested. But it's 50% vegetable glycerin and 50% water. And this just gives body to the water. It helps the water stick to the plant. It also helps it to be prettier. And one of the things that I want to say is that vegetable glycerin is natural. It's used in frosting. It's non-toxic, and insects love it because it's very sweet. It's derived when they make coconut oil. It's a byproduct of making coconut oil. So it's a natural substance that is very sweet, and it's great for it doesn't hurt the environment or anything. And so you just do spritz, and off you go. Now, the thing is, put the water in first. Let me tell you, I was teaching a class and I had 30 bottles, little bottles, and I put the glycerin in first in all of them, and then I put in the water, and then I put in the spray nozzle. When I did that, everything got plugged because you're basically sucking up the vegetable glycerin into the straw, like maple syrup. It was terrible. And I had to go and take them all apart, blow through the straw, get all the stuff out and shake it up and start over. So just word to the wise, put in water first and then shake before you put in the nozzle. Now, this activity serves two purposes. Number one, it makes it pretty. It's pretty. Water droplets are pretty. And number two, it gives the camera's focus system something to latch onto. So if you have a smooth expanse of a surface, say a tulip, the chances are the camera is going to go for the stem or the tips of the petals because it wants to go for an area of higher contrast. If you want it to land somewhere in the middle there, the easiest thing to do is to place some water droplets where you want the camera to focus because they act like little magnifying glasses and they're areas of high contrast on the surface of the flower, and it is awesome to helping the autofocus system latch on. Could you toggle and pick your spot? Absolutely, but sometimes things are moving. And if you can't use an individual spot or you can't manually focus, this can help make things a little easier in a situation where things are swaying. I love to add visual interest with crystals and prisms. So one of the things I like to use is a crystal prism, but it's actually acrylic. I get these from like a school supply store. Any place that sells things for science class will have these, and they're usually more inexpensive and come as a set. So you can buy a group and pass them out to your friends. Otherwise, you can buy nice ones online. I don't know if B&H has any of them, but maybe they have something similar, some kind of a crystal that you can put in front of the lens. And then the Omni system, I know they have, I've seen those on B&H's site as well. And they're awesome because the Omni system from Lens Baby is just like, oops, as I knock over all my crystals here. These are hard because you have to hold your camera, hold your lens in front of it and then move it and sway it. And it's not very repeatable. You have trouble. If you get something awesome, it's sometimes hard to repeat that. With the Omni system, you screw it on the end of the lens and then it uses these little magnetic arms to move the crystals wherever you want and lock them down so you have more predictable results. It's pretty easy that way. And so you get a couple different kinds of effects. You get lots of different effects, but here are a couple main ones. Soft haze, which is something I really like in my images. Now, if you don't like backlighting and soft haze in your images, you're not going to really like this, but it adds visual interest to something. If you shot the same patch of weeds between the sidewalk, 3 or 4 times, this can inject some interest into it. And then some of the crystals create very defined flare shapes. And if you like that sort of thing, that's something you could try as well. Now, the other thing that I like to do is to use a copper pipe, a little chunk of pipe, and you can see it down on the lower right of the screen, what that looks like. And I love these so much. And the reason I love them is they act like tiny little reflectors, but you're not limited to just this. You could use tin foil wrapped around a toilet paper tube and then taken off. You could find a silver chunk of piping. You could use a plastic tubing that's like 1 inch in diameter, maybe for a hot tub type situation, and cut a chunk of that off. Anything that's reflective and cylindrical and hollow makes a great tiny reflector. And how you use this is you have the camera and the lens, and then you have this right next to the lens. Okay, so don't touch the lens. You don't want to scratch the lens, but you have it really close to the lens, and then your subject is opposite it. And then the light is opposite that. So you have light, subject, copper pipe, lens. It's very close sandwich. And this helps with a macro lens that has close focusing distance. You can still use a longer lens, say a 135 that doesn't have a super close focusing distance, but just keep this closer to the lens. And then you use a center focus point and focus through it. Okay. You don't want to have it on wide because then it will likely latch onto this object, and you don't want it to do that. You want it to go through the middle. And oops, sorry. And so you see here on this is the inside of the copper pipe, and I actually spritzed it with sparkle spray, and that's why you see this little stream of bokeh balls in there. And this is just a smattering of little pictures taken with the copper pipe. It will pick up the color cast of bright flowers if you shoot it in a way that you can see the reflection of the flower in the inside of the copper pipe. So if you have pink flowers, you might have a pink swoosh. In this case, we have a purple flower, so we have a purple swoosh around it. You can get some really neat effects. Now, the lighting isn't always awesome. So if you're shooting at home and you have the ability to have some portable lighting, I highly recommend an ice light. This one, you can see my hairband is on the gel because I stepped on it one day, and it doesn't quite hold on quite as well as it should. But anyway, I love it. And so I use this to create visual separation. You can see these little grape hyacinths are in a bundle. There's kind of in a bunch. And it's hard to separate sometimes one object, one flower from the others, because they kind of all lump together in the same lighting. So I like to backlight one or two of them to sort of visually separate things out. And when you do that, you can get something. I'll show you. This is like a pullback. You can see the little blurry grape hyacinths, and then there's the ice light behind them, and you get something like this. It helps with poor lighting. This was taken after sunset. It was really dark, and it just helps to give a cleaner outcome as well. Now, I also love this. This is tiny lighting. I used to use a Lume Cube, which you still can use. I have 3 Lume Cubes, but this is the portable Lume Cube Panel Mini, which actually is touted more as like a vlogger type light for, poor lighting conditions, but I absolutely adore it for flowers. As you can see here, the wash of yellow light that you see is from that light at 3200 Kelvin set to, and I love that as well. Now, I want to go a little bit further because there's more to this than just macro. Now, macro is, getting in pretty close. And I just have to move a couple of things here because I want to show you my favorite book. This book has been loved and worn a lot. It's Elliot Porter's book on intimate landscapes. It's kind of his story and a bunch of plates of his work. And I absolutely love Elliot Porter and the idea of the intimate landscape, because sometimes macro is inaccessible. Like maybe you don't have a lens that gets in close enough and you still want to appreciate nature. So focusing on intimate landscapes gives you more options. And I call them macro with atmosphere. It tells a smaller story. It tells a bigger story than macro, but a smaller story than, say, a real landscape where you're getting the whole scene. And what I love about it is you don't have to include the sky, which automatically makes exposure easier. If you have a subject and then you have a bright sky, it always makes that harder. And so telling a smaller story, avoiding the sky, helps to tell the story easier with an easier depth, with easier lighting. And then shallow depth of field and the perceived compression can sort of bring the background forward and envelop your subject and create these little stories. I also love to look for color. Red and green are pretty common. You can find red roses or red poppies and greenery. So that's a pretty obvious one, but you can also make color theory happen. Back to my ice light here, I had these little daffodils that were getting kind of spent. I have to admit, they were sort of on their tail end. They had been out for a while and were looking sort of sad and tired, but I wanted to demonstrate something for you. So many of you have experimented with blue hour. If you have a gelled light that's really warm or a tungsten light that's really warm and you shine it on a white flower like this, you can go ahead and white balance that flower with the white balance dropper tool, and it will create this glorious blue color around your flowers. Now this is a little bit intense and I could have cleaned this up a little bit more, but like I said, the flowers weren't really keepers anyway, but I wanted you to see that you can definitely manipulate with color theory, yellow and blue, here a little bit. Now, of course, purple and yellow are the polar opposites. This is a kind of a one-off, but this is a fun color combination to play with. If you're thinking of, say, Van Gogh, there's several paintings that he really featured yellow and blue, and also Vermeer liked to use yellow and blue. So this is kind of a fun thing to play with flowers. And don't forget your winged and feathered friends. Intimate landscape opens things up. Birds, bees, and butterflies can become part of your scene, and you can enjoy those more simply by getting a lens that lets you take in a little bit more of the scene. And I love them. I would photograph birds all the time, and I'm always trying to bring more birds to my yard. And here's a little butterfly just to share. They sat so nicely waiting for me to photograph them, so I had to share. And then you have these fun little, isn't that face? Oh, I love this face. Okay. So we had a windstorm, and I think that these fledglings got knocked out of their nest a little bit too soon. And the mama has been so good taking care of them. And it's been almost at this point, it's been 3 weeks since they were kicked out of the nest. So they're pretty independent at this point, but they still come to my yard, the mom and the babies. And they're almost getting to be, the babies are about 3/4 the size of the mom at this point and fly fairly well. But this is when they were just recently kicked out. And I have a behind the scenes video on my YouTube if you're interested. And it's just like, they're so ugly. They're cute. So sweet. Anyway, enjoy the nature in your yard. Say a peaceful mind minimizes frustration. We want to amplify this. So here are a couple of tools or tips that you can do to minimize frustration as you're shooting. 2 things that you can take into consideration as you're shooting. Number 1, don't be a bee. I love bees. I made a whole habitat in my yard for bees. But don't be a bee when you're shooting. And what I mean by that is when a bee is collecting nectar from flowers, it goes bzz, 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 bzz. It's all over. I don't want you to do that. I want you to slow down, stay still, and stick with it for 5 minutes. So don't be a bee. Don't be a bee. A bee would tend to go from this flower and then go across the street to that flower and then go over here. Don't do that. I want you to stay put. The reason being, 5 minutes in the presence of something that you think is interesting or not will teach you something. If something was good enough to catch your eye, it's good enough for you to sit down and enjoy it for 5 minutes. 5 minutes, that's all. I know it can seem long as a shooter who might be a busybody and wants to go all over the place, but 5 minutes. So how can you do this? I have another tip. I want you to shoot your prepositions. We're going to go back to grade school now. If you remember from grammar school or grade school, prepositions are words that indicate direction. So around, over, under, between, through, next to, behind, among. Find your flower and then try to shoot your prepositions. Shoot through the petals, under the petals, over the petals, around the petals, from above, from below. Whatever you do, 5 minutes with that flower before you move on. Because just sitting there and appreciating it, you're probably going to notice something that you would have missed and overlooked had you not done that. So that's my tip for you there. Also, this is just a smattering from a session I did that way. And this is just 6 frames from maybe 2 dozen that I took of this. There were a couple of flowers, and I believe that they were all on the same plant. You know, I was sitting on a half wall at a botanical gardens, and this was what was immediately in front of my lens. So I'm sort of cheating here in that I'm not sticking with just one flower, but I didn't move my behind for 5 minutes. And I was able to create, like 2 to 3 dozen images that I really liked from that little session. I just parked myself and shot. And that's what I want to convey to you, that it's okay to sit and shoot and enjoy it. All right. So, and here's the thing. I love to do painterly editing. I love painterly editing a lot. Like, it's a big deal for me. I really love it. And yet some people edit for their career, their day-to-day career involves editing, and they don't want to do that. So you either edit or you don't, depending on which one is not stressful for you. I like to do painterly editing, but sometimes I don't want to do anything at all because I've been editing or making editing videos and I just don't want to think about it. So I tend to even strip out color and just shoot black and white. And this image on the right was straight out of the camera, no editing. It's one of the black and white creative styles in a Sony camera, and with a little tweaking in the camera itself. And I love it, and I can shoot RAW plus JPEG if I want to take the whole works into, say, Lightroom and play with the RAW file later. I have it, but I don't even do that a lot of times. Sometimes I just want to shoot black and white, like I'm shooting a roll of film, and be done with it. And that is very freeing. If I want to shoot color, I like to use autumn leaves. I know a lot of people have heard me say this. I love the color palette and the toning. I will lower contrast and saturation and sharpness in camera, and it just creates this beautiful, sharp, gorgeous base for floral images. I love it. And it's easy, and I don't have to think about it. And if I get futzy or something on my phone, I can increase contrast if I want to after the fact. I mean, I can do a little tweaking, but it's so minimal that it doesn't cause me any stress if I'm wanting to move away from editing for a while. And here's another autumn leaves image. All right, so if you want to use more in-depth editing and you want to do something like you see here, the ones that I used for this image were Mextures, Lens Distortions, iColorama, and then Lightroom on the iPad. I like to edit on my iPad. My eyes are bad. I like to see things bigger. So my iPad is my choice for editing. In fact, if I could do everything on my iPad, I would. I do use my computer sometimes for more in-depth edits, but these are my favorites to get started with editing on the iPad. Here's the thing, don't feel compelled to share all the time. That's something that I think really runs counterintuitive to the whole restful aspect of this. If you're shooting something in 5 to 20 minutes with the purpose of trying to get your next Instagram picture, it is going to wreck it for you. You need to take on this type of thing independent of your social media. Okay. And maybe you're feeling like you're under the gun and you need to get stuff out on your social. Try not to consider it macro therapy if you are, because it's not going to be relaxing. It's going to be anything but relaxing. So definitely don't feel compelled to share. Okay. I've said my piece on that. And then don't let winter stop you. Okay. I've shot these. It was between -15 and -20 degrees Fahrenheit. I get those things called little hotties and I put them in my pocket. And I keep my batteries in there. And of course, nobody wants to be out in -20 degrees very often. But if you're like the Swedish and you just say there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad apparel or inadequate clothing, then, you have no excuse. And sometimes in the long winter, it just helps to get outside and see some nature. So these were photographed in the middle of that, freezing cold temperatures. And, I made some pretty images that I like still to this day. So don't let the weather stop you. All right, let's work with light a little bit. So what are your lighting options? I personally love backlighting, and these little weeds they're legit weeds. They're not really pretty. They're weeds, but when they're backlit, all of a sudden they look like a million little diamonds just sparkling through, and they're so gorgeous. So I absolutely love to shoot weeds backlit. You never know what you're going to find. Things that some people might want to just kill and pull up might actually be stunning, And so look for dust sparkles. Backlit veining. This is one of my favorite things to do, and you've seen this image before, so let me show you how we do it. It involves a few things. The sun, or a bright light source, but mostly I use the sun. A tree or a bush where you can hold onto the leaf and put it between you and the sun. Ideally, you want to use a long enough lens so that you don't have the sun pouring into your lens, into your eyes. Okay, that's the caveat. You might have to move off center a little bit so that the sun isn't going directly into your eyes. Just keep that in mind. We want to keep everybody safe. But I like to choose rather large leaves because then the lens is close enough to the leaf that it's more or less filling the frame and no sun is coming directly into my eye. The idea is to backlight the leaf and then snap a picture. So I'm usually holding the leaf with my hand, and then I am shooting like this. And so a shorter macro lens might be helpful if it's really lightweight because you're going to be shooting one-handed. It also is fine if the leaves are blowing and you're able to just chase them with the lens. Sometimes that works out too. But this is pretty easy stuff, and maybe a little fly will come land on the leaf just as you're taking a picture in the in focus area like happened on the right. And it's just really fun. Do you like to get up in the morning? If you're a morning person, you're lucky because the light is always gorgeous in the morning. Even if it's raining or cloudy or overcast or super sunny or whatever, if you get up early enough, chances are it's going to be gorgeous. So just take advantage of that. And this is some blue flax in my yard. And then if you're struggling with light, sunsets or whatever, just look for a bush or a grove of trees or something to interrupt the light flow. And in this case, this little boring flower was in my yard, and there's a grove of trees in front of it that's sort of breaking up the light that's streaming through and makes these big bokeh bubbles or bouquet bubbles. Now, I commend you to go make pretty pictures or go help somebody else to make pretty pictures and spend some time enjoying nature because it's good for you. All right. Thank you so much. I'm really thankful to be here, and this is not going in there. Anyway, I'm Caroline, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining me.